If you come across this video, you're probably interested in writing the dental aptitude test. And if that's the case, you've come to the right spot. My name is Haneen, or your fave dentista, and we're going to talk about how I studied for the DAT. I took the DAT twice, I applied to dental school twice, and I was accepted to both Ontario dental schools on my second attempt. There are three major things that I prioritized. Number one, I set myself up for success. Number two, I adopted sustainable active study strategies. Number three, practice, practice, practice. So without further ado, let's get right into it. Number one, I set myself up for success. This means having the right schedule, the right resources, and the right mindset. There are a lot of sample schedules that you can find online, and they can just set the foundation for how you plan to study. The most important thing was that I was realistic. I always tell myself I'm gonna study for 12 hours a day, and I only end up getting 4 to 5 hours done anyway. I didn't have the time to play games like that when I was studying for the DAT, so I just told myself I'm gonna study for 4 to 5 hours a day, at least 6 times a week. The content portion took about 1.5 months, and the practice portion took about 2 months. In total, the studying was about maybe 300 hours. I studied for the PAT section 7 days a week, every single day, because it's a skill that you need to build. The difference between the first time I wrote the DAT and the second time I wrote the DAT was 4 points in my PAT section. And that was honestly the make it or break it for my application. So I would not skimp on that section by any means. And you start from day one. For the reading comprehension section, first time I wrote the DAT, I would do at least one passage a week. The second time I wrote the DAT, I didn't do a single practice problem, and that translated into my score 100%. So I don't recommend that. At the very least, do a passage once a week so that you are familiar with reading passages of that size and answering questions right after, because that's not a normal thing that we do on a day-to-day basis. So it's not sufficient to just be reading all the time. So studying for the PAT was actually kind of fun, but the natural sciences portion was so difficult for me because a lot of the content I just didn't enjoy. What I tried to do for myself was always integrate positive reinforcement throughout my studying. I had something to look forward to every night, every week, and after every block of studying. They were really simple things like a bubble bath or a bike ride or binge watching Netflix. That was a test that you failed. I'm kidding. The point is, it's guilt-free time that you've scheduled in. Studying does not have to be a miserable experience. So for resources, I personally use DAT Crusher. A lot of my classmates also use this, and it was very easy to realize why. It met all of my needs. It was tailored to the Canadian dental aptitude test, so I wasn't learning any information that I didn't need to. I supplemented it with other free resources. So the DAT Crusher was the only paid resource that I used. It worked for me because it had videos for concepts that I struggled with. It had notes that were quite comprehensive. And it was especially useful for the PAT section because it had auto generators for every section of the PAT, and I could actually fit in studying throughout my day in the click of a button. But the most useful aspect was the practice test. It came with 10, and these were paper gold for me because I knew they were representative of the real deal, and how I did on these tests most likely would translate to how I did on test day. And now, mindset. So in the mornings, I hyped myself up, and in the evenings, I was super kind to myself. There is so much that all of us sacrifice to write these type of tests. There is a million things we'd rather be doing. We study during our only time off. It could be our 3rd summer in a row giving it a go. Be working multiple jobs. It's not an easy time, but you are your #1 fan. All your hard work is going to pay off. You just have to believe it. Part of the concept of setting yourself up for success means eliminate distractions. It also means limiting extra thinking. Anything you need to limit how many choices you're making in a day. And lastly, have a plan for when you're demotivated. It happens to the best of us. If you genuinely don't feel like studying, just promise yourself 10 minutes. That's all. And hopefully inertia will take care of the rest. Now, number 2, sustainable active study strategies. So this is my method. First, I don't take notes. The reason I don't take notes is that often I feel that note-taking is a chore, and I do it to prepare me to study, but it's not actually an active part of my study. If you are going to take notes, make sure that it's not rewriting word for word. Things that I did find were helpful were making mind maps, writing down questions that I had, writing down keywords to keep me organized, writing down mnemonics that I thought of, all those things that were really quick to write. So when I'm studying, the first time I go through content is the only time that it's going to be passive. I look at the content that I plan to study that day, I go through it really quickly, look at the keyword, and get familiar with what I need to know. Then my second exposure to the content, right after, I'm trying to explain it to myself like I'm a toddler. I'm just trying to understand the concept. There's no note-taking involved in this because I'm not memorizing at this point. If I had to tell myself a bizarre story about the concepts, so be it. I needed to make it a little bit interesting for myself so I didn't fall asleep. My third exposure to this content, which is usually right after, I'm thinking like I'm making a test. I think about other possible questions that could be asked from a certain concept. And it's not crazy questions at all. Just training yourself to critically think while you're studying. Those type of questions will already get you geared up for test mode. In fact, to make this easier for myself, I actually dedicate the first practice test that DAT Crusher provided for this purpose. I would go through the questions one by one to see how are questions being asked so that when I'm studying, I can think in that same line of reasoning. Now, the key to actually memorizing is the concept of spaced repetition. Every time you learn something new, the old content is pushed further and further back into your memory. So you need to grab it out of your memory and put it to the forefront. And you need to do this repeatedly. What you can do now, which is one of the ways I study in dental school, is I download the notes, I upload them in a program called Notability, and I use their tape feature, which allows you to just cross off and then tap when you're ready to practice your recall. This was a much more time efficient option for me than making my own flashcards, for example, so I do highly recommend it. I wanted to go over the same content over and over again until it was automatic. And every time I went through the content, it became easier and easier to remember. And also, if you benefit from a study buddy, by all means, go for it. I bug people all the time. If you're a verbal learner, this could be very useful. All concepts that I struggled with, I would add it to a growing list called my struggle list as I was doing practice problems. And I would consciously think about the tips and tricks that I set aside specifically for that concept. For the perceptual ability section, at first I did not time myself. I learned how to do them. I watched videos using DAT Crusher and also on YouTube to just really get down the technique. Then I used the auto generators that DAT Crusher provided so that I can practice as much as possible. For the PAT section, you only have 60 minutes to answer 90 questions. So on the screen, I have exactly how much time I allotted to each section. For me, that meant doing the least time-consuming questions to the most time-consuming questions. Some quick tips for the PAT section that I learned as I studied. For the angle ranking section, the option choices help you narrow down the right answer. Right off the bat, eliminate what's wrong, look at the remaining options and pick the best choice based on the tips that you've already been studying, and then keep it moving. I knew, for myself at least, that the difference between angles were so tiny that without a protractor, I wasn't going to be able to confirm the answers regardless. So 5 more minutes on one question wasn't going to be worth it. So I had to train myself to be okay with the uncomfortable feeling of not being sure, which can be very difficult when you're writing a test of such high stakes. But I had to learn to not dwell on answers because there are other questions that are 100% answerable. And those ones are the cube counting questions and the hole punching questions. At least those two, every single question you do, you should try to get right. For the other 3 questions, we have a guest. For the other 3 sections, these are the ones that I struggled with the most, so I gave them more time. But these are questions that you should also try to practice to as close to perfection as possible. The PT section is really a section about practice, and that brings us to point number 3. Practice, practice, practice. This is arguably the funnest part of your studying because it's actually applying what you've been learning. I already gave the first practice test a sneak peek while I was already studying. Every other test, I timed myself as if I was doing the real deal. Then you need to review the test. Reviewing the tests in detail is what sets you apart from other students. You want to know why every correct answer was right, why the wrong options were wrong, and then you want to think about 2 or 3 more questions along the same line of reasoning as the question you're looking at. This helps you cover as much ground as possible. You want to get the best bang for your buck with these limited representative tests because there's actually so much that you can learn from them. Because we're talking about so many practice tests and hundreds of questions, what I found helped me keep organized was an Excel sheet where I had 10 tabs for the 10 tests I was doing, and I would keep track of all new learnings. So if I got a question wrong, it would be on this Excel sheet. If I was debating between 2 options, it would be on this Excel sheet explaining exactly why one answer was correct over the other answer. So this Excel sheet and my struggle list were things where I was really keeping track of my learning. And this really helps you fill in your gaps in knowledge. But for all of this, from day 1, confidence is so key. I really needed to believe that I could do it. I'll admit, on test day, I never felt 100% ready. I didn't feel like I knew everything there was to know because that type of security doesn't really exist for a test like this. Instead, I convinced myself that whatever question comes my way, I have the tools to figure it out, no matter how foreign the question looks, because chances are I have come across this content in another form. So I really had to put that thinking cap on, internalize that confidence, because it goes such a long way. So if you found value in this video, please use my DAT Crusher membership discount code, YourFaveSave. Follow me on Instagram and TikTok, and please don't hesitate to reach out. I was in your shoes not too long ago, so I'm more than happy to share what I do know now. Best of luck. You got this.